Good afternoon everyone and welcome to an Aussie Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update today, the 7th of April 2014. My name is Chris Nitzo, and of interest to note for our followers is that Aussie Cyclone Chasers today are now in the pre-planning phase. That means that we understand there's a cyclone out there, it's going to move west, and there's a fairly good chance that it's going to hit the coast, and at this stage it's going to hit the coast somewhere between Cairns and Lockhart River is our best guess. And really, when we start to look into the finer model details, it starts to show the Cooktown and Cowan area, or the area between Cooktown to Cowan, most likely to be impacted. And at this point in time, most likely to be impacted by a Category 3, although the intensity models vary between Category 2 and Category 4. So at this stage, we would say Category 3 with the outside chance of it being strong enough to be a 4, and also the outside chance of it weak enough to be a 2. So folks, that's what we're thinking at the moment. Remember, this is the pre-planning phase, so there's no guarantee we're going on a chase yet, but it is getting more and more likely that we will be chasing this system into some pretty sparsely populated regions. Hopefully it won't go anywhere near Cairns itself, because that is a region of a lot of people, and it will have major effects on infrastructure and major human impacts if it forms there, if it hits there. Whereas the area that we're looking more than likely to go to, the Cooktown to Cowan area, while it's populated, it's fairly sparsely populated. So human impacts obviously are going to be major for anyone there, but the amount of people there will be a lot less than there would be if it went further south. Alright, hope that makes sense. Let's have a look at the track maps. Firstly, the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre paints a pretty grim picture for the Cairns area. Now, we don't see much of this track forecast being modelled, so we're thinking that this particular track forecast from the JTWC goes against a fair bit of modelling in terms of how far south they drag the system in the medium term. You can see here, located just to the north of Cairns upon landfall around the Port Douglas area. So and it's likely to happen there on the JTWC forecast on Saturday morning at about 4 AM is around about the time for landfall. Now, that is quite different to most of the guidance I'm going to show you, and also quite different to the Bureau of Meteorology's extended track as well. So overall though, expecting very, very similar tracks from the JTWC, and let me show you the bomb track up until Thursday. We're expecting fairly similar tracks, and then on Thursday things go a little bit pear-shaped, with the Joint Typhoon Warning Centre going a lot further south, the bomb keeping it a lot further north. Here is the latest Bureau of Meteorology track forecast. You can see a system here pushing to the west or west-northwest, and then pushing west-southwest from there, and basically in the longer term making landfall south of Lockhart River and north of Cooktown. So in this region is a little spot called Cowan, which is around about 30 kilometres inland, and there's that region between Cowan and Cooktown is really the area we're looking at focusing in on as Aussie Cyclone Chasers. But with the obvious threat extending south to Cairns and extending north even as far as Bamaga, but we've got to be realistic that we can't actually get anywhere north of Lockhart River. In fact, we can't even get to Lockhart River. Flights are booked out, and the chances of actually getting there by car are very, very remote. So we're focused in on the Cowan to Cooktown area as Aussie Cyclone Chasers, but obviously knowing that the entire area north of about Cairns needs to be on alert for this system as we head towards Thursday, Friday, and maybe even Saturday. If we take a look at the regional satellite imagery, we can see this big trough system in through here, in through WA, creating a lot of shower and storm activity and pushing into South Australia, and then further pushing into Victoria, which is some great welcome rain for them. But look folks, this is the focus of attention. You can see spinning away quite nicely now is Tropical Cyclone Ita, and we'll have a bit of a closer look at her on satellite. You can see here she's spinning away quite nicely. We've actually started to see some really cold cloud tops redeveloping. Has been slightly hampered a little bit through vertical wind shear yesterday, and also its proximity. Even these little islands here are enough to just disrupt the warm ocean water from being able to feed into the system. So the fact that it's right near these islands, plus the fact that we've had some vertical wind shear across the system over the last 24 hours has resulted in it basically staying fairly similar in intensity over the last 24 hours, perhaps even weakening. There was some thought that it may have weakened just slightly below cyclone intensity at some point overnight and has now redeveloped and re-strengthened into a TC, but really it was probably under cyclone intensity for less than a few hours, so no need to downgrade it at any stage there. You can see here some cirrus outflow, and you can see some really nice feeder banding in from the north, and that was one of the features of the system yesterday. So when we start looking at and piercing the clouds and looking at the microwave imagery, we start to see that Ita is developing an eye, and we start to see that eye right in this area here, and it's got a fairly intense eye wall to the southern side. You can see here the eye wall, fairly intense there. So we're seeing some signs of intensification of that low-level circulation center, even though it may not look 100% on satellite. Certainly once we pierce those clouds, we are starting to see a much better looking system than we were 24 hours ago, and we're also seeing this feeder band continuing really nicely, coming into that center of circulation there. So folks, look, overall it's in a fairly decent condition now to basically start to bomb out over the next few days, and so we should see an intensification at a climatological rate, which tends to suggest to us that by the time this actually comes this way and makes landfall, we should see a Cat 3 on impact, maybe even a little bit stronger than that. But look, that's dependent on a lot of factors between now and then, and we're still talking 4 to 5 days away, so there's plenty of time to change. So if you're on the coast, anywhere from about this way all the way to up the top of the Cape, you need to be aware of this system coming towards you. Once again, we see that the developing cyclone has its winds really stacked on the southern side here. You can see here the southern semicircle or southeastern quadrant and southwestern quadrant is where all the gale force winds are. Anywhere to the north, winds are pretty light. Once again, possibly being constricted by a little bit of land interaction there with these islands off PNG. So at the latest visible imagery, we see that the center of circulation will be located somewhere in there, with the strongest convective cloud tops in this area here. So we've got that southern eye wall is packing a bit of a punch already, even at a Category 1 intensity. So it shouldn't be too long before it becomes Category 2, and on the bomb, they expect it to become Category 2 early tomorrow. The JTWC expected to become Category 2 today, sometime later today. And I guess the big feature over the last 24 hours since we last spoke is that all the computer model guidance is now in a much tighter alignment as to where this thing actually goes. Now remember yesterday we were talking about a possible recurve out here to the southeast being an unfavored option but an increasing option. Well, that's now been washed away. None of the models are predicting that at all anymore. So what we are seeing now is some fairly tight model southwesterly direction almost all the way to landfall, and making landfall, as I said, in that Cohen to Cooktown region. You can see about 80 to 90% of model members have the system making landfall Cohen to Cooktown, with a couple outliers out here towards the Port Douglas Cairns region, but most of them are in that really tight agreement there between even you could say Lockhart River through to Cooktown. Even the Canadian CMC at day 3 has the system located in a little bit further to the north. Most of the model guidance from the CMC suggests that the system pushes further north and much faster, so it gets captured by the ridge or gets pushed by the ridge a lot faster than the other model guidance suggests. So this is an outlying model, the CMC, and it's not the most accurate model, but out to Thursday morning the system has already made landfall and it's already back into the Gulf of Carpentaria by Thursday morning, which seems a little sudden, as I mentioned yesterday. The UK Met, which comes in slightly less accurate than the Euro, we can see here overall model guidance suggesting, much like the CMC, a little bit further to the north, although we do have some outliers pushing it a little bit further south. Now this is by Thursday morning, so you can see here by Thursday morning the system has not made landfall. And by Thursday night, the system does make landfall. A lot of the model members suggesting that the system will make landfall. And interestingly, with the UK Met, we're looking at landfall much further to the north on most of the guidance here available, from Bamaga all the way south to Cooktown being the outlier, whereas the ensemble mean pushes the system right over the top of Lockhart River. As we head to day 5, the model wants to do one of two things with it. Wants to either kill the system off over the peninsula, or some of the resulting model members suggesting that the system will continue tracking west into the Gulf of Carpentaria, or even some other model members are suggesting that track a little bit further to the south. So overall, the guidance suggesting a coastal crossing in the far northern Cape York Peninsula, and then overall suggesting it will continue west. However, there are outliers by day 5 suggesting that the system will either be dead or will be pushing a little bit further to the south. But remember, they are outliers. So the European model, as we head towards Wednesday, we can see that the system has tracked in a northwesterly direction today. Now that's interesting because it hasn't started showing signs of doing that just yet. However, the Euro model wants to push it northwestwards as a building subtropical ridge builds in underneath it over the next 24 to 48 hours. Now we haven't seen evidence of that just yet, so this model track may be slightly off kilter, slightly to the north at this point in time. Assuming that it doesn't move in that northwesterly direction, we are likely seeing that a lot of the track guidance from the Euro is a little bit too northerly bias. So what that means in English is that we might actually see most of the track adjust a little bit southwards over the next 3 to 4 days, and landfall are likely a little bit further to the south than what the current guidance is showing us. So right now, the system is expected, according to the Euro, to cross sometime late on Thursday around the Bamaga to Cooktown region, with the most favoured area being Lockhart River. Then by Friday night, most of the guidance has the system well and truly crossing the East Cape York Peninsula and starting to slow down a little bit as it crosses the peninsula, and most of the guidance in fairly tight agreement here that it's going to be lying somewhere in the vicinity of Cowan to Laura and maybe slightly further to the north. It may have already recrossed the Western Cape around the Weipa area as well, so that's something to watch out for. Weipa on the back end of that could be copping some southerly winds and southwesterly winds on the western edge of the system as well that we haven't really talked about. Now, the system obviously being that far north is likely to remain a system as it crosses the west. If it crosses to the west peninsula coast and into the Gulf, if it pushes a little bit further to the south, say south of Princess Charlotte Bay, we are likely to see the system struggle to maintain intensity as it heads west and tries to get back into the Gulf, just purely and simply because we have larger mountain ranges in this area and we have a much larger length of land for the system to have to travel across for it to get back into the Gulf. So those two issues are going to create a bit of a tougher time for the system to push west into the Gulf if it pushes a little bit further south. Now remember, as I said, the Euro seems to be a little bit northerly biased at the moment, just because we're not seeing evidence of that northwesterly movement just yet, and we should have been seeing it by now according to the guidance available. Speaking of northerly outliers, we just had a word about the ECMWF being a fairly northerly outlier in terms of the rest of the guidance. If we have a look at the Access Regional Model, which is the Bureau of Meteorology's model, we can see that the system will track in a general west to west northwesterly direction, and eventually, just as it gets close to the Cape, tracks in a more west northwest direction and pretty well makes landfall, if you'd like to call it that, right over the top of Bamaga or even Thursday Island as a tropical cyclone. And you can see here, now this is a very, very large northerly outlier. Not many models at all are going for that particular track forecast, but I guess it is there, and it is a regional model, and it is quite high in terms of resolution, so we do need to pay some attention to it. The reason it has such a northerly motion to its movement is because the ridge builds in underneath here over northern Queensland and the central Coral Sea, and really builds in with a bit of strength and pushes the system in a west-northwest direction as it approaches the Queensland coastline. So once again, it is an outlier, but because of its high resolution, we do have to pay it some attention. Now, obviously, in that situation, Cyclone Chaser, we can't chase it. Unfortunately, we have to just let that one go. but the other model guidance is suggesting that it could be chaseable. So we take a look at the UK Met forecast track, and more so we're looking now at intensity. So while the tracks all range from, as I showed you, Bamaga all the way down to north of Cairns, we see that the forecast intensities range just as dramatically, because the UK Met has this system only being a category 1. But see, the issue, I guess, is that the system has, or the modelling system has, initialized the tropical cyclone as far too weak. And so what it expects it to do is intensify, then weaken, then intensify again on its approach to the coast. So folks, do take this intensity forecast with a grain of salt. It is one of the weaker intensity forecasts, only expected to get into a category 1 according to the UK Met. The Canadian CMC model does go a little bit step further, and it does predict a category 2 on impact, as it impacts the coastline around Princess Charlotte Bay to Cooktown, and then pushes in a southwesterly direction from there, and is likely to bring some fairly heavy rain. If the CMC scenario comes off, we're likely to see some very heavy rain here on the North Tropical Coast and Tablelands area, as well as the central and southern peninsula, possibly extending to the Herbert and Larbertican coastline. The NavGem model also suggesting a Cat 1 or 2 on impact here is in just north of Cooktown on the 11th of April, and then pushing in a south to southwesterly direction from there. So look folks, some of these models are still predicting that possibility of that recurve to the southeast, but they're doing it far too late. So they're doing it after the system crosses the coast, and that's why it tracks in a more southerly direction. Now that could be a huge rain producer for inland northern Queensland, but there's a lot of doubt and variability in that southerly track post landfall. Most of the reputable guidance suggests the system will continue pushing in a westerly direction out here and back into the Gulf of Carpentaria. And you can see exactly what I mean now using the GFS, the latest GFS forecast model. You can see here category 2 on impact around Cape Melville, and then it pushes in a southwesterly direction, gets caught by an upper trough, and pushes back out over the water here off the North Tropical Coast and Tablelands. Now this is an extreme scenario in terms of the recurve, but it just goes to show that the recurve dynamics are still there for it. However, the timing of the recurve has now changed, and the system has already impacted the coast initially. And once again, remember that it's only overall the less reputable models that are suggesting the recurve to be so intense. The European ensemble is suggesting some type of recurve as well, and it's mixed, and it's actually caught in between, keeping the system pushing west towards Northern Territory, fizzling the system out here in the Southern Gulf, or recurving it back out here off the Queensland coast and back into the Coral Sea. So the European model is quite confused in its longer term track. Very tight agreement in the early term track and middle term track, so the 3 to 5 day track. Very good agreement now between the models that the system will track anywhere from Bamaga to this area here, but the longer term track is quite variable, and it's variable both internally but inside each modelling and between modelling. So if we look at day 5 on the European ensemble, we can see that some of the ensemble guidance has it pushing west out here to the south of Weipa around Cape Kiawea, and also some of the guidance has it remaining here on the east coast around the Cooktown area, Cooktown to Cape Melville area. So overall there's still a lot of variability in the track speed, but not so much in the track forecast to 5 days. Now what happens is by day 6 we see 2 areas of doubt here. We see this one here, which is the most likely location for the tropical lower cyclone, whatever's left of Ita, while we also see the potential for the cyclone to be starting a recurve back out here to the southeast off the coast of Cooktown to Cairns. So we do see some variability developing in the guidance by day 6. By day 7, that variability gets even larger. This is the favoured outcome. This is a possible outcome. And then by day 8, we see, once again, this is the favoured outcome. This is a possible outcome, making another landfall in the southeast Gulf of Carpentaria on a recurve, or this could be another outcome yet again of a low pressure system located near the central coast of Queensland. Now remember, I guess what I said yesterday rings true, that if the system does decide to track back off the coast and start tracking southwards or south-southeastwards, it is likely to not make landfall as a significant tropical cyclone anywhere south of Townsville, just because the westerly winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere will try and push it offshore. The easterly winds in the lower level of the atmosphere will try and push it onshore, and the resultant fight between the lower level and the upper level winds will shear the system. So even if it does decide to make landfall further to the south, it will only make landfall as a Dylan type system, you know, one of those really, really weak systems at the surface. If we take an ensemble look at the upper levels of the atmosphere now, and we see why the hell is it expected to move so dramatically to the west, like so obviously to the west, according to most of the guidance. Dramatically is the wrong word, but so obviously to the west based on the guidance. Now you can see here, this is an upper level high. Now around the upper level high, a system will track, will not track straight into it, it'll track along it. And so this upper level high, located over Queensland and pushing out into the central Coral Sea, will allow the system to adopt a west, or will create the necessary conditions for the system to adopt a westerly track. Now the upper level flow will be from east-southeast to west-northwest. However, tropical cyclones in the southern hemisphere will track just south of the mean flow. So even though the flow is where the arrows are going, the system will track just south of those arrows. So instead of west-northwest, it'll just track west, or just slightly north of west. And now you can see there's another upper level trough here. Now this upper level trough has been creating a lot of wind shear for the system over the past 24 hours. That's going to go away. So the upper level high will then be left to do its work. So this is now as we head to Tuesday night. And then as we head to Wednesday night, we see that this upper level ridge builds in underneath the system, so it's all the way out to the west here. And I guess the big issue for us as cyclone chasers is, will it be a west-southwest movement, or will it be a west-northwest movement? If it's a west-northwest movement, we're out of play. If it's a west-southwest movement, we're definitely in play. So that's where the movement comes from over the next few days. You see this upper level high building in here. The upper level trough is out of the way, and so the upper level high is free to steer the system. Now by day 4, we start to see a little bit of variability creeping into the guidance, and the reason is that that upper level high pushes a little bit to the west here, and we're left in a fairly stagnant environment here just off the coast of eastern Queensland, where the upper level ridge is no longer such a massive steering influence on the system as it starts to weaken and push west, and so we're left in a fairly benign upper level pattern here. So most of the guidance suggests a continued westerly movement, but you might actually start to see a bit more of a southwesterly movement just before landfall, because that upper level high is not as strong. And remember that in the southern hemisphere, cyclones will always try to track south of the mean flow. So if the mean flow continues to be westerly, the cyclone will try and track just a little bit south of that towards the west-southwest, for instance, okay, from where it is there. And then by Friday night, we really have nothing acting on the system. It's very weak steering pattern on Friday. And then on Saturday, still nothing acting on the system, although we do start to see a little bit of an amplification of an upper trough. Now remember, the opposite to a ridge, an upper trough will try and push the system in a southeasterly direction. And so that's why by Saturday night we have that little bit of variability in the guidance as to whether the system starts to recurve out here, back out off the water, or whether the system remains in the Gulf and not being steered anywhere in a hurry. And so that's where the variability in the guidance comes in the longer term, because those upper level conditions start to become quite interesting and quite weak. Now as we head towards later in the weekend and early next week, we see a new high building in here and a new high building in here, and we see that the remnants of the cyclone are likely to be in here and not being steered by anything much at all. This upper level trough at this stage doesn't have the amplitude or the extension to the north here to capture the system and push it southeast. But there is still a lot of variability here, because we're now talking a long way away. We're talking Sunday night for a tropical cyclone and for a fairly complex upper level pattern by that stage of proceedings. So we're not sure in the longer term what's going to happen. But over the short to medium term, we're pretty confident on what's going to happen. The system will track west and should eventually make landfall to the north of Cairns, most likely in the Cooktown to Cowan region. However, that may change slightly. That particular strike zone may change slightly over the next 48 to 72 hours. And I'll leave you with this nice little image of this bubbling convection right around the center of the system. This is the center of the system here, and it's the latest image we've got from 11:30 this morning Queensland time. Folks, this one looks like a very interesting tropical cyclone from our perspective, and hopefully it will hit in a sparsely populated area. Overall, we're not going to talk rainfall amounts just yet. We'll give that another 24 hours until we start to see a little bit more model guidance on that particular topic. But for now, we can expect heavy rain anywhere to the north of Cairns, possibly even to the north of Innisfail, if the system adopts a track closer to Cooktown. And then, obviously, if the system does start a recurve, we could be seeing some very heavy rain across northern and inland Queensland as well. If the system continues tracking westwards towards the NT, we're going to see a lot of that rainfall in the Gulf country, with some feeder bands along the Queensland coast producing some scattered showers, and eventually some very heavy rain for the Northern Territory. But a lot of that longer term models, a lot of that longer term rainfall stuff is completely up in the air at the moment, based on whether the system will recurve or whether the system continues tracking to the west. Thanks for watching today, folks. I know it's a long one, but it's a very interesting cyclone. We'll talk again on Tuesday night. Good night.